edition of Chargers Unleashed. Jake Hefner and Dan Wolkenstein here with you from the LAFB Network. If this is your first time tuning into the show, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button on YouTube. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Dan Wolkenstein, preseason be damned. I don't care. The Chargers get to play a football game against players in a different uniform this Saturday as the Los Angeles Chargers gear up to meet the Seattle Seahawks. First preseason game of the year. And like I always say, Dan Wolkenstein plus working the phones equals great things happening. And today, Dan Wolkenstein has done just that. As to gear up for this first preseason game, we have brought in a very special guest. Dan Wolkenstein, as always, floor is yours.
Yeah, I would say this is less of work on the phones, more like work on the practice field as we are at training camp and got the chance to see Kris Rhim a bunch, and great guy, covers the Chargers for ESPN, was gracious enough to come on with us. So excited to talk to him about this Chargers team. We'll talk to him about his takeaways of training camp so far, of the joint practice and the dominant defensive performance we saw. Talk to him about Christian Fulton. We'll talk about Joe Alt, some surprises and what to look forward to this upcoming preseason game against the Seahawks. But Jake, before we do that, we have to pay the bills. Let's talk about our friends over at BetOnline.
I want to remind everybody that BetOnline is your number one source for all of your sports betting needs this season, from baseball, golf, soccer, right up to the top fights of the MMA, UFC, and boxing. Every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads while the games are being played. When the game is over, head on over to our online casino and get in on a game of blackjack or poker, or unwind with one of our 150 slot games. Head on over to the website today. That's betonline.ag to get in on the action. Just make sure to use that promo code BELIEVE. That's BLEAV for your 50% free bet credit on your first deposit for up to $250. Bet online. The game starts here.
The fantastic Kris Rhim from ESPN joins us next on Chargers Unleashed. Fresh off of the joint Chargers practice with the Rams, we had a walkthrough today. What we saw from the Chargers. Here to talk about it, the one and only Kris Rhim from ESPN does an awesome job covering this Chargers team. Brings a wealth of experience. Kris, thanks for joining us. And how's Hardball land these days? We got practice going. Like, how's it feeling?
Thanks for having me. Yeah, it's been good, man. Joint practices are always fun. So, we're just coming off of that. And then today was, a walk through kind of half speed today after guys, going through that. So it's been good, man. A lot of energy, a lot of excitement. It's been good.
Now we have a preseason football game, which is wild here in less than a week away, and lots to discuss today. I want to talk to you about kind of your takes on the joint practice, what you've seen so far, maybe some surprises that you've seen in camp. Christian Fulton has been balling out, so I have to talk about him. The tight ends, running backs, first impressions, all that jazz we'll get to. But let's just kind of take away what you saw from today. I know you said today was a walkthrough. We saw your tweet. Looks like Christian Fulton is continuing his kind of on fire, as we would say in NBA Jam. But talk to us about what your takeaways were from today's walkthrough.
Yeah, my takeaways were really just him. Is that it's really there isn't much from today except for that. Really, like he's been playing well. I think I like to joke with some people and say that this is kind of the worst time of the year sometimes because people don't have anything better to do than to obsess over what we see at these practices. But he's been good, man, for a guy who when kind of struggled in Tennessee. He has a lot to prove. He looks great, like, sticky coverage, then they're, playing against the Rams. He looks good. So, Christian Fulton, man, that's my biggest takeaway. He looks good.
Now, Kris, let's go back to just a couple of days ago, joint practice with the Rams. And from the Chargers standpoint, it just sounded like their defense, again, just had a day as it relates to what happened. Obviously, Justin Herbert's not out there. The feeling is different with him offensively not being out there in terms of what this offense is going to be able to do with Easton Stick and Max Duggan. But defensively, the Chargers got 6 takeaways and doing it in ways that, getting tipped passes. And more importantly, stuff that we'd love to see is getting tipped passes at the line of scrimmage with Tito and Thule getting those and forcing those interceptions. Just from a defensive perspective and your takeaways from that practice as a whole, because I know you were watching so much of it. When you finally get to see him put on the pads against opposing teams, what was the energy like? What was, who was it that really stood out in those practices? And overall, just what was the ending message from Jim Harbaugh after that?
Yeah, I think he was really pleased. I mean, Sean McVay told reporters after that his offense needed to play to that's a higher standard, right? Like he was disappointed in what he saw. I mean, it was kind of like, I don't know, when you watch the defense against the Chargers without Justin Herbert, you kind of take it with somewhat of a grain of salt because they're playing against a backup quarterback, right? So you kind of say they look really good, but how good are they going to look? And against the Rams, their O-line is pretty banged up, but that's Matthew Stafford back there, right? And you're getting all these tip passes, you're getting interceptions, turnovers. Some of them, all of them were on Matt, obviously, but against the ones they look good. I think when I looked, I was largely looking at the offense, but obviously was going back and forth. But I think Joey Bosa, he every time he's out there, he looks, like the man. He just looks like Jesse Minter called him a monster. He's not really. I mean, I guess some people get wins, I guess, over him. Few and far between, but he's just dominant, right? And then there's Christian, who's just always around. He just seems to be around. Like whenever obviously there was a Tooley tip that he got the interception on, but he pass breakups. He's always touching the ball, and Durbin called him a ball magnet. So yeah, and then I think offensively, the offensive line, the Rams defensive line looked good. It looked really good. They were consistently getting pressure. Again, this was the Chargers O-line without Trey Pipkins, so it was Bradley Bozeman was playing right guard for most of the day, and then Brendan Himes was at center. So that obviously is not the starting O-line, but I think Joe Alt fared well. He had some reps against Braden Fisk, Jared Verse, Byron Young. Fisk got over on him a couple times for sure. He held his own a couple times, a lot of the time for sure. I think Greg Roman said when he looked at Joe Alt and was evaluating how he played, he said, he didn't do bad, but he thought there was some miscommunication amongst the whole offensive line, that they could have been better. Jim Harbaugh actually said he was impressed with them today. So, take that, what you want. But that's my long takeaway. Joey Bosa, Christian Fulton, Joe Alt, we're standing out to me for sure.
Now, I think the hard part for me, and I'm just being brutally honest here, is you're seeing a 3/5 of a backup offensive line. The Chargers are dominating against the Rams, and then Justin Herbert is not out there throwing passes. So this defense has been dominating, right? Like there's an awesome picture on Chargers.com of Jesse Minter, the defensive coordinator, just like jumping up as if he's one of the guys. And you're hearing about the turnovers of Christian Fulton. Is it good defense or is it bad offense, i.e. not Justin Herbert throwing for the Chargers and no offensive line starting for the Rams? Like what? I'm trying to temper expectations for myself and for fans watching, listening, but we have the scars of the defensive performance the last few years. What actually are we seeing right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I would say is that it's somewhere in the middle, right? Like when you're playing in the regular season, you're going to play teams that have banged up offensive lines, right? You're going to play backup quarterbacks. So you can't just throw it out and say, well, they're playing backups. Like, well, pretty sure the Chargers, were playing without everybody for like the last 4 games last year. So like, you know what I mean? Like you're going to play banged up teams. So this stuff definitely matters, but it's not the end all be all. Like it's a lot of the times in practice, defense and the offense are given directives that we don't know, where they're trying to give the defense a certain look or vice versa, right? So they're doing things to help each other out, and then we might see something happen, and we're just looking at it and saying, "Oh, this run went for no yardage, or this was blown up." When in reality, the directive might have been, "Yo, let us blow this up because we want to see what it looks like, or like how we'll react. Like, really get on him on this play because we want to see how it looks." So that's why I say at this time of the year, like, get excited, but also understand. Just remember, like, we're in training camp, right? Yeah, that's sorry about the banging. That's on my end. Something's happening in my place. My bad.
It's all good.
But yeah, that's what I would say. Don't say, we're going, all right, we got the 85 Bears defense, but for sure, you should be excited. And I don't think it's fair for anyone to say like this doesn't matter. I also don't think it's fair for you to say our defense is going to be great because on August 4th we had a good day against Matt Stafford. You know what I mean? That's what I would say.
I want to go back to Kristian Fulton for a second there, Kris. Does you see the trail that he's been on to get here to the Chargers? Obviously, not getting to his college potential at what was in Tennessee, and we heard a lot from him in his first press conference from the Chargers in terms of maybe it wasn't the best atmosphere. We've heard Jesse Minter echo that a little bit more since he's been on this team, saying he doesn't just have a chip on his shoulder, he now has a boulder. And for a guy who is not even 26 years old yet, and seemingly I looked at him as saying, this could be just the reclamation project that the Chargers need to say, different atmosphere, you take him over here, you put him in a different system, and he can finally get to that potential that a lot of people saw from him when he was coming out of college. And now to have this week that he has been on, and again, as you mentioned today, cap it off with two additional interceptions in practice today. Is it fair to say, and I know that Dan is going to comment on this as it relates to just the overall corner depth in general, but is it fair to say, is it too early to say, in general, in terms of your impression personally of since Kristian Fulton has arrived, how Jesse Minter looks at him? Because we know Steve Klingscale wants all these guys to be so versatile, but it seems like there are more DBs that I can remember that are actually making plays, whether it's Kristian Fulton, Asante Samuel Jr., as AJ Finley now is capturing that third safety spot. But as it relates to Kristian Fulton, do you feel like this is headed that direction for what we would want to see from him, even on just a low deal coming in here, possibly a bargain for the Chargers?
Yeah, I mean, I think right now he looked Kristian. You know, if you're Joe Ortiz, who's out there watching, you're thinking, man, like I feel like I'm excited. Like I feel like I got a lot of bang for my buck here, right? Because this is a guy who is on a prove it deal. Like you said, potential didn't meet the potential, and he's playing like he has something to prove, right? Like he's playing like he wants it. And he's not being overly aggressive and missing stuff. He's everywhere. Like everywhere the ball is, Kristian Fulton is there. Like it's literally everywhere, and he wants you to know how he's playing too. Like he came up to us the other day and said, make sure y'all report that. And after a pick, the play was blown dead, but DB's never gonna throw a pick away. So yeah, I think Kristian, the camp that he's on, the run that he's on, I think the Chargers org is probably very excited. And I think he should be excited himself, because I think this is something that he wants. And it's always good when you have a player, and the Chargers just have a bunch, especially on defense, right? Like you look at the Chargers defense, they just have a bunch of guys who like have a lot of reasons to prove to people why they are who someone said they once were, who they weren't last season, right? Like you could look at Joey, you could look at Kristian, you could look at Derwin. You can even look at guys who haven't been there yet, like Dayon and Alohi, who wants to prove. There's so many people who have stuff to prove, whether it be first timers or people who didn't play so well last year that can play well. And I think Kristian has been, maybe their most consistent guy other than Joey, in camp.
Now let's talk about Jesse Minter for a second, because I think. And I've thought this a few times, but there's a lot of similarities in scheme to what we've seen with the Chargers and with the Ravens, which you have experience with, and what we saw with Brandon Staley, Mike McDonald defense, all that jazz. But this Chargers defense just seems so different now, and that has to be one because of culture, obviously. But Jesse Minter just seems to be bringing not only a confidence, but a calming, communicative presence to this team. And without the music and stuff that you see at practice this year, it feels like you're seeing so much more communication. These guys are really able to kind of rely on each other more. From what you saw last year with Brandon Staley and this defense versus now, tactically or tangibly, what are the biggest differences that you've noticed so far?
Well, I think that the biggest difference in the way guys talk about the defense is that it's simple. Brandon obviously ran, this kind of very effective, and elsewhere kind of convoluted, this pattern match. So there's a lot of rules and a lot of different things you have to do depending on what your opponent was doing, right? And the way guys talk about this defense is that you have a role and you have your job, but you can fly around. Like you aren't thinking as much. And I think Brandon's defense worked. Obviously, we've seen it work with the Rams, right? It's worked in certain places, but it didn't really work here. And a lot of with the Chargers, and a lot of the reasons why guys said it is just sometimes we were just making too many adjustments, or there were too many configurations to the defense. Whereas this one sounds a lot more simple. There's a in terms of the communication, and it gives guys the opportunity to play free and to make decisions out there, not based off maybe stuff that they have in the back of their mind that they're trying to follow. So that's what I'll say the biggest differences are.
Want to talk about some surprises in camp thus far, because I feel like when Dan and I were there 2 Saturdays ago, there was a lot of things to talk about. There's still been a lot of players that have been talked about, whether it's through Jim Harbaugh, Greg Roman, Jesse Minter. In terms of what you've seen over the course of this last week and a half, who are some players that have actually come out and surprised you in camp?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't even know you were there. Sorry if I didn't say hi to you.
Oh, it's all good.
Oh, by the way, but next time say hi. But I think the players that have stood out to me for sure, it has to be Jaret Patterson. I think he's got me, my next 53-man projection. I think he'll have to be on there from what I'm seeing. He's a guy who, it seems like Jim Harbaugh is always going to give him a high five, and even when he does something to where I'm like, that wasn't that crazy. Like Jim Harbaugh's still going to, he's like, good job. Running with the second group often. So he'll be my number one. I think tight end Zach Hines has been a guy who, since OTAs, he's been just around the ball. He's just been catching passes, consistently open. So those two guys have been players that have been, pleasant surprises. And then I want to say, not really. I think a lot of people were expecting a lot of stuff from this guy, but I don't think I was as high on him as everyone else. But Brendan Rice, I think he's also been pretty good, man. And I think a lot of people expected big things from him, but he's been really consistent, man. He's been pretty good. So I'll say those three.
You mentioned Brendan Rice. I noticed that he was at the joint practice with the Rams with his dad, Jerry Rice, obviously. Did you notice any collaboration with Jerry and the receivers, or was there any connection there, or was he kind of to the stands spectating?
He was kind of just being a dad. I didn't really see him interact with any of the guys. He kind of just took a picture with Brendan, but it was kind of cool to see him, incognito like that. But I'm sure if he wanted to give some tips, they would have taken him.
They would listen for sure. And I think one thing that the Chargers brass has listened to is Jim Harbaugh's emphasis, and probably Joe Ortiz's emphasis, on protecting the quarterback. And I think there's been so much focus these last few months on kind of the offensive line improvements and focusing on protecting the crown jewel, so to speak. And obviously, you bring in Joe Alt, 5th overall, and he's going up against these all-pro, future pro or Hall of Fame edges, right? You got up and coming with Thule, you've got Khalil Mack, you've got Joey Bosa, you've got Bud Dupree, and you see joint practice. And tell us about kind of what you've seen so far from Joe Alt. I know he's at the podium today talking to the media. What are your thoughts on Joe Alt so far, and maybe the dividends he's paying?
Yeah, I mean, with Joe, it's he's obviously the best reps that he's going to get are probably going to be at practice against Joey and Khalil, right? It's probably harder to find, better guys to go up against. And I think for Joe, I think he's been good, right? I think he's been all right. I wouldn't say, he's dominating as you said, 2 of the best guys in the league, right? If he was dominating them, that would either be concerning for Khalil and Joey, or that would mean that Joel is like, and a Hall of Famer in game 1. So I think he's gotten some, when the pads first got on, he, just to put in perspective, like what Joey's been doing at practice, right? Like in one-on-ones, like him and Rashawn, like it was not close. Like Joey and it's not like Joey's just absolutely manhandling 70 in these reps, right? So it's not like and we know how good Rashawn is, right? So I'm just saying to put in perspective, like what Joe is playing against, right? So there's plays where Joey is bull rushing Joe back and Joe's falling, or he's hitting Joe with a move and Joe's stumbling. There's other plays where Joe is standing Joey up, right? Like completely standing him up and holding his own, right? So I think it's just I just sit back, man. If I had popcorn, I would be eating it. It's just like it's must see TV. Is those guys on the end, those Rashawn when he's facing Khalil or even Bud or Thule or when he's facing Joey or Khalil, it's always like just big on big, right? Like it's like a main event, and every time there's fireworks. So with Joe, I think he's good, man. I think he's not to sound like a coach, but he seems like right where he should be, like getting better each day.
You're hearing how much of a terror Joey Bosa has been on as of late and how good he actually is. We saw kind of some notes about him possibly hurting his hand or wrist or something in the last practice. Mm-hmm. Did you see that? Like, do you know what's going on with it? Is it seemingly okay? Was he at practice today? What's that all about?
Yeah, so he walked off with a trainer. I'm not sure what he hurt. We weren't told. Jim doesn't specify at this point. But yeah, he left practice, but I can't even speculate on what it might have been. But yeah, we'll talk to Jim Harbaugh again on later this week. So we'll get to ask him. We didn't ask him about Joey today. But he'll tell us he's working through something or Joey will be back.
Yes. Now, with Herbert out for seemingly the next 2 weeks or so, obviously a lot of emphasis is really going to be put on this running game. And I love the fact that you had talked about Jarrett Patterson surprising you in camp thus far, because now is seemingly just in a single year. This Chargers team, who was looking for someone to step up behind Austin Eckler for the longest time, now seemingly have this stable of running backs that has just a plethora of talent behind it, because now you have Gus Edwards, who's still working back. J.K. Dobbins has looked really good in camp thus far. You have Kamani Vidal, who, is going through something, but still has been a nice addition to this running back group. You mentioned Jarrett Patterson. You still have Isaiah Spiller and Elijah Dotson. And so just from that standpoint, I guess to get your take on it, is the battle really just between running back 3 and 4? How many are they going to end up keeping by the time that we're all done here come September? But what has this running back room really shown you since you've been there at camp?
Yeah, I mean, I think like you said, they have a deep group, right? I mean, JK looks great. He's explosive. Every time he gets the ball, he seems to go far. Gus looks like a tight end. He doesn't look like a running back. So, yeah, and then Jarrett and Kamani. I mean, if I could see them keeping 4 backs, if I could see that for sure. So I think maybe the competition is kind of for those final 2 spots. And if you want, you probably imagine Kamani's probably gonna get guaranteed there. So maybe for the last 3, I'd have to guess between Jarrett, Isaiah, and Elijah. That's kind of where I'm seeing the competition at. If they're going to keep 4, that 4th spot, which if there was a race, Jarrett would be ahead right now in my eyes.
Is it that special teams factor? Because I've seen it in camp where Jarrett's been taking special teams return. They've got Isaiah Spiller out there taking special teams returns. Is that really what's going to be the difference maker when it comes down to it?
I think so. And that could be the reason why a guy like Isaiah could make it over a guy like Jarrett, right? Because, yes, Jarrett's been great in the running game and all that, but you'd probably have to consider, how much are we going to have him there? If he's really going to be this guy in the special teams, you might ask yourself, is he so much better in special than another person that we want to take him when he might not even see the field that much? So that's what it'll really come down to. Jarrett's been effective in special teams. You can only see so much in this setting too.
True.
But yeah, I think that's what it'll come down to with spots like that. You're really looking at specialists and how they can contribute there. But you also, again, have to think about J.K. Dobbins. He's played I think it's 24 games in the last 73 possibly he could have played, right? So you're also thinking like that 4th guy actually might play a bunch. And, look at Baltimore last year. They ran through every running back. Dalvin Cook, they signed at one point, right? So it's don't be surprised if you see a lot of these guys play, because Greg Roman will split carries for sure too.
And I think one thing that this running game has lacked for years, it feels like, has been blocking, and specifically the tight end position, I think, on the edge side has been something that has been, let's say, surely lacking, sorely lacking as well. Hayden Hurst, Will Dissly, you got Donald Parham, obviously, Stone Smart. You mentioned the Zach Hines, Trey Benson. There's a whole bunch of tight ends, but given Greg Roman offense and Jim Harbaugh offense and the strength and the emphasis they put on tight ends, and given the roster as it's currently constructed, do you feel that the tight end room is now a strength of this offense as opposed to a weakness as we've seen in years past?
Yeah, for sure. I think so, especially with what they want to do in terms of like how they want to run the ball. It's like when you look at Hayden and you look at Will, they're just two guys who really enjoy like just playing football, right? Like just like beating on men, right? Like just pushing guys. Like when they talk about it, they just enjoy pushing men into the ground, and they get excited about, I am destroying your will to fight right now. Like that is how Hayden and Will describe football. Like, and that's the kind of players you want. And then Hayden is also like, Hayden is a good receiver now too. Like he can pass catcher, I should say. I was in Atlanta when he was in Atlanta. And that was like one of the best seasons of his career. Playing with Kyle Pitts. He caught a lot of passes. So he's a guy who can be effective there as well. Big energy guy. So I think for sure, Greg Roman he's mentioned Donald Parham a few times, saying like we want to, Parham, obviously we know he can catch, he can catch passes and do that as a receiver, but it's his run blocking that's really been a challenge for him. And Greg Roman's talked about getting him more involved and trying to have that impact there. So I think for sure with Hayden and Will, there's just, should be excited about that group.
Kris, we'll get you out of here on this one. We are finally back to watching the Chargers actually play against another team, regardless if it's preseason or not. We're all going to have our own things that we're watching for on Saturday, but Chargers against the Seattle Seahawks this Saturday. What is it that you're specifically going to be watching for?
Yeah, I think this Saturday I'll be watching for the receivers, seeing how these receivers play. I think that's the biggest. I think I want to see who plays. And that'll probably answer some questions about where they see guys. Like, is Quentin Johnston going to play? I don't know, right? Is who will play? Is Ladd McConkey still working through something? I want to see how they do, how Brendan Rice does. So I think at the end of that receiving group, when you think about if they're going to have, maybe 5 to 7 receivers. Who they're going to keep. These are the games when guys are going to separate themselves, like Brendan, like Simi, like Cornelius. These guys are in battles for the end of the roster. And I really want to see the kickoff. Like, we haven't really got to see like a real kickoff. They do it, and Cameron Dicker's been doing these like weird kicks where sometimes he'll kick it like right by someone's shoulder, like right by one of the gunner's shoulders or something, or like he'll line drive them. Sometimes he'll pop it up. So I'm really eager to see how that works, if Darius takes one back. So I think the kickoff as well as the receivers, I'm really excited to see what happens there.
Talking to Kris Rhim, ESPN reporter covering the Los Angeles Chargers team. You can find him on X at Kris Rhim, KrisRhim1. Kris, we always love having you on the show. Now you are officially friend of the show, as it's been multiple times being on here with us. What do you got going on here coming up for written pieces? What's your next thing that people should be looking forward to?
Oh yeah, I'm writing a little thing about Bud Dupree, and like his he's brought a lot of energy and just fun to a group that people describe as boring with Joey and Khalil, the old guys in there. Bud is another old guy, but a fun old guy, I guess. And writing about that, so you guys should see that this week.
I love it. Kris Rhim, thank you so much for coming on, man. Thanks for sharing all of your insights. Appreciate you and your time. We will talk to you soon. All right, man.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kris.